So I'm doing a video, I guess, trying to rationalize what maybe other abuse victims who have very openly come out and said that Amber Heard is a lying liar who lies, and why they might feel that way. And this is, I want to kind of start this off and say this is not a condemnation of Amber Heard. I'm looking at notes because I want to make sure I get this all out properly. These are what emotional experiences someone might have that might push them to saying she is not being truthful. The second point I want to make is evidence over emotions. If evidence comes out that Amber Heard was physically abused or otherwise abused, that's more important than whatever my lived experience is or anyone's lived experience, because we need to use what we physically know over what we feel. I believe that strongly. Secondly, this is a lot of explaining my own emotions because I reacted very poorly to her testimony. And initially, I was trying to be very open. And I was like, okay, like I've heard Johnny Depp say things. Like I now need to really zero in and listen to what Amber Heard was saying things. And I guess my theories and why, and kind of how I processed why I responded the way I did to her testimony. And finally, I have not been physically abused, only emotionally abused. Um, I actually have wrestled for like 8 years, and I'm on the autism spectrum. You give me someone physically attacking me, and I feel a lot more comfortable than someone emotionally attacking me. The latter, the emotional attack is harder for me to deal with because I'm more dumb, I'm stupider and less well equipped to handle it. So just context here, but research does show that emotional abuse is a prerequisite for physical abuse, and that kind of makes sense. It's one of the reasons that, like, when people ask, well, why isn't this person retaliating? It's because the abuser has worn down your sense of self-worth as well as emotional stability. So by the time they start hitting you, it's harder for you to fight back because a lot of your defensives have already been battered down. I think that's something important to note whenever you're looking at an abuse case in general, is it doesn't start big. It builds, because what they're trying to do is weaken you to allow more and more dominance. And so if you start with really big actions, it just doesn't work, right? You have to think of it as an erosion process and not a day one, they beat me up context, because you wouldn't tolerate that, because that hasn't been normalized, nor have you been weakened to the point where that would work. So that's 2 points to keep in mind that are important. And so the reason that I guess Amber Heard's testimony stood out to me as really bizarre and like evoked a really emotional response of like, I don't trust her. And the first one is a lack of her own wrongs being really ever testified to. And I don't really ever hear her talk about many wrongs that she committed in the relationship in any sort of concrete way. And it feels eerily reminiscent of my own experience with emotional abuse, where the person perpetuating it also did not own any of their own wrongs within the situation, and they would straight up give accounts of stories that like magically erased what they did. It was amazing. Like I'd be like, how do you have a memory like this where you just completely absolved yourself of any sort of guilt? Like, it makes you feel crazy, because you're like, this just doesn't fit with any account or timeline for multiple people. Like, I'd cross check and I'd be like, they did this, right? And someone else would be like, yes. And I'd be like, and that's what I felt like listening to her account, where she would say something and like 5 other people said, no, that didn't happen. Like that's just completely false. And so like, it very much felt like the same tactic where you just said things that didn't happen and you were just like, nope, this is the story because it's the most convenient story to me, so that's the story that I'm recounting. The second one tactic that I saw, that I experienced, and I found really frustrating and also just bullshit, is minimization of any provable wrong, potential wrong that you did. And I noticed that with her explaining her own drug use. She draws this line between wine and vodka or hard liquor that just makes no sense. If I drink a single serving of whiskey and someone else drinks half a bottle of wine, the person who drank half a bottle of wine is more drunk. And it's not about what type of alcohol you use, it's the quantity and total percentage of that you're in the alcohol content that you're drinking, and that initiates what level of alcohol it is. Yeah, that's really that. That's just, it felt like a really bullshit point to make that really minimized whatever drinking she did on her own. And the only reason I could guess that you're minimizing that is because you drank a lot of fucking wine. And that's how I emotionally reacted to that, is like, yeah, I've seen this before. I know what you're doing. No, 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 no. Wine isn't some if you think wine is some magical substance that doesn't get you drunk or doesn't make you act like an asshat when you drink a lot of it, you're just impossible reason with. The other one is like the drugs she said, like happy drugs, right? Yeah, like this, and this. It's like, no, also no, it's a drug. You're putting yourself in an altered state of mind. You don't get to say, oh, it's fine. And that's not to say people who do drugs are bad people, but it is what it is, right? That's really what I'm getting at. And the minimization doesn't do you favors, and it makes me really, it gives me super red flags when people do that. Because like I said, when I experience things like that, the person doing it was not at all being honest with their role in our relationship. Third, she has this lack of weaponized experience, is what I'd call it. And what I mean by that is it's actually this is one of the reasons it's so weird that she can't tell you the things she did wrong or seems to like ignore them. In my experience, in my emotional abuse story, when I did something wrong, it was not forgotten. Because the way it worked for me was I did one wrong thing and like, damn, I knew that I did something wrong, and I remembered the wrongs I did because I was beaten over the fucking head with them for like a year, for like the next year. Like, if it was a good one, oh man, that wasn't going away. I was gonna hear about that every time any sort of argument came up or any sort of discussion about like the state of the relationship came into play. That was never going away. And so the fact that she can't specifically refer to wrongs that she did feels very weird for me in the context of, yeah, I knew what I did that was wrong because it was weaponized against me. And the second, it feels like a lot of the times she can't give specific gifts or things that Johnny Depp did for her. And that's also really weird because another aspect of my personal experience with the relationship is that the good was weaponized against me too. Well, I did this for you. I did that. Like, you remember your time of need where I drove up to this I don't want to give exact things because I'm not trying to gas the person, but remember that time of need that you had where like I like changed my flight plans and drove over and did this whole thing for you to bail you out of that situation? Oh yeah, like hell yeah, that was used against me because that justifies any wrong that was done to me later down the road because they did this one nice thing. And so I just have to take that damage because one good thing was done to me. That was constantly done. And the fact that she doesn't have any specific stories for those two things is like huge alarm bells for me. Absolutely massive. It makes no sense just from the realm of what my lived experience of abuse is. And finally, the cycle itself, the way she describes it, is very weird. And what I mean by that is there feels like there's this lack of tension building. It just feels like he flips a switch and just all of a sudden Amber Heard is getting the shit kicked out of her. And, or the context isn't there that really makes you follow it. And what I mean by that is, one, the cycle starts out really strong. And that's really weird for me because typically the first steps is wearing down at your emotional barriers for a pretty long time with larger and larger encroachments. And the fact that seems absent just doesn't work narratively for my understanding of abuse nor my lived experience with abuse. You don't start big, you start small and you work your way up so that way you can get away with more and more and more and just dominate the person more and more and more. And it feels like to me Johnny Depp just starts his like evil demon king from like nearly day one. And so it just doesn't work. And this is harder to describe, but the pacing itself, the way she describes her fear and uncertainty is very different from how I felt and described my own fear and uncertainty with the relationship. She seems really tunneled on this like love bomb and violent act pattern, which I think, and this is why it's weird, if you were to read about emotional abuse, you would tunnel on those as being the most important. But for me, a lot of the times, what was the most important or definitional about it was actually the muddy middle, where I didn't know what was going to happen, and it was very scary, and tension was building, and I was really just actually not even hoping for the love bomb, nor was I hoping for the huge explosion. I was hoping we just could stay in the middle and like we could have a semi-normal reaction to things, right? I don't want the giant gift, nor do I want you to explode. I just want to be able to say something to you and just get a normal response. That was really what I wanted, because also the love bombs were used against me. Like, they weren't gifts, they were just ticking time bombs that would eventually be thrown in my face again. And so it just feels so disingenuous listening to her account as the whole. And yeah, it was really hard for me. I didn't get through all of it. I don't think I can actually rationally evaluate a lot of what she said. I'm going to try to, but I wouldn't feel like, even if I could rationally evaluate what she said, I don't think I would feel comfortable making a clear diagnosis on it, because she evokes such strong emotions with the way that she presented information. And it could very well be that the reason she's presenting information like that is maybe she got bad coaching. Maybe someone advised her poorly that you shouldn't admit your wrongs because that's going to weaken your case. Or maybe there could be a lot of things, right, that made for a very similar behavior pattern that is very explainable and was ill-advised. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on this. Let me know what you thought, especially if you've experienced any form of, I'd say, domestic abuse, where you'd say, actually, no, this was very characteristic of how I felt. I'd actually really love to hear that, because I think this is my lived experience and my observations personally. And I think if other people have different experiences, I'd really love to hear those, because I think 100 people is way smarter than one person. And so I'd love to hear anyone else who thinks differently on this. Thanks. Hope you're having a good day.